You gotta love it when the you get comments like that when you're driving by. It's something, man. You'd think that, you know, performance cars and stuff would be chick magnets, but no, man, it's the classics. Ladies love the classics. Oh, it's so bouncy. Hey guys, welcome back to another Dad Mods video. So the suspension in the Ford is the priority for today. We've got a very basic setup in the back of this thing. It's essentially lowering blocks and a few removed leaves, so we don't have like the best axle control. It's got, you know, there's a torsioning kind of effect that happens, or torquing effect that happens with lift blocks. So if you got a lot of power like this thing has now, and you hammer on it, you've got axle wrap that can happen. So that kind of sucks. So what we're hoping to do, in addition to just kind of like lifting it up, is having the air over leaf setup just provide a little bit of support for the time being. It's a temporary solution because ultimately I'm going to do a link suspension setup in the future, but right now I need to get a little bit of air in the back, so I want to be able to raise it up. So that's going to be the priority for today. So let's get on over to the garage. I got to change, and let's get this thing in the air and see if we can start figuring out that air over leaf setup. Okay guys, so before we go installing the air over leaf setup in the Shoebox Ford, I want to just take you guys through a very brief explanation of what a leaf spring is and how air over leaf actually works. So there are much better detailed videos that are out there that are going to deep dive into what exactly a leaf spring is, but effectively it's a very simple concept. It is nothing more than a bunch of steel plates, strips, whatever you'd want to call it, in a pack. They are stacked on top of each other to give you a leaf pack. You have they're progressively tapered as they go down, so they're smaller ones on the bottom and then they get longer and longer towards the top. There's an eyelet on both ends, and there are bushings that go into that. One side is fixed on the frame, the other side has a shackle on the back of it. That's what allows articulation. So what that looks like on your car is, let's draw the frame here first. Frame sweeps up, does something to that effect. Let's say that this is the back of your frame. I know I am so good at drawing. And so we're going to have basically this is the place where it mounts. So this will be the front of your leaf spring. This is your wheel well. Your axle is going to sit in here, right? So then we've got a shackle mounting location on the back, and we're going to have a leaf spring that is going to do something like this. And it'll usually have a little curly Q at the end of it. You've got your shackle. It's nothing more than a big strip of steel. Very simple. I mean, they almost look like flat stock. Some of them they've got bushings in them, and they've got, like, you know, it's much more of a bracket looking thing. It's not literally just like two strips of steel, but in these really old classic cars, sometimes that's literally it. They just look like a couple pieces of flat stock. So that's your rear shackle. And then you've got multiple leaves in the pack. So bear with me, I'm gonna have to just draw a little bit of space between this so that you guys kind of get the concept. Usually this one's very long, this one's close. But again, you know, you kind of get the idea. And generally there's like 7 of them, but it depends on the vehicle and the weight and a lot of things. You know, you might look at a semi-trailer and, you know, they've probably got 15 leaves in the pack. They're giant too. But in a car, there's not that many. Now, the axle can go above or below. In these classic cars, a lot of times they're going on the top. So what you'll have is an axle that will mount here. Axle is what mounts to your tire, basically. You know, you've got your wheel and tire on the outer edge of it with the actual axle shafts that's got like the mounting location with the lug bolts and all that, lug nuts and or lug studs and nuts and all that stuff, right? That's on the outside here. So the tire sits out here. Again, wheel well is right here, wheel and tire is here, and this is sort of the inner components of it. The axle's in the center. So that's what an axle is, and that sits on your leaf pack. Now, pretty simple concept, right? So where does this go with dropping your vehicle with an air over leaf setup? What we do is we're eliminating leaves from the pack. This is really probably about the only way that you can do this and have it work okay, is to remove a lot of that load capacity that's provided by multiple leaves. Some people go as far as actually running a monoleaf. I don't know. I don't think I would personally ever do that. I would do links way before I'd go to that extreme. If you run a monoleaf, you have basically no real support on the vehicle. Yes, that one leaf might support a certain amount of weight, but it most certainly will not support the weight of a vehicle. So when you eliminate all of those and you leave just the one, there's a high risk of that thing snapping. You really like lose some of that side to side and the up and down support that comes from the leaf spring. You know, it's putting a lot of risk into it. It's putting a lot of force on that one, and it could risk snapping. And if that single leaf spring snaps, that's your only link to the vehicle. So your axle could go flying backwards. It'd be terrifying to have something like that happen. So that's one of the biggest risks when it comes to air over leaf, because you are eliminating a lot of the support here. Now, there's one trick that you can do, and that's exactly what I did here, is I'm running a drop block. Drop block is just that. It is a block of aluminum or steel, and it actually physically raises up the axle. So it gives you a static drop with a very simple component that just literally brings the axle higher up into your wheel well, closer to the frame, basically. So it drops it. You maintain a lot of your original, basically all of your original load bearing. There are a few characteristics that happen with that. It has to do with kind of a torquing effect, because your axle is providing twisting force to move your tires out here. So that twisting force means the pinion wants to twist upward, and you have a leveraging effect that happens from having the block there. It's not tied directly to the leaf pack anymore. So there is leverage that happens there, and when you end up with, actually it twists like this, and if you end up with axle wrap, it can be kind of yucky, kind of like I showed you in the intro to the video. Now, where airbags come in is that, so we've got these things here. We've removed a couple of leaves from the pack. In my case, I've got 4 leaves and I've got a 2-inch drop block. So that brings things real close to the bump stop. So that's basically a bump stop. What it does, what it looks like in my vehicle, and we're gonna erase all of this real quick. So in my vehicle, it looks more like this. Axle. So when things are fully set down and all the weight is on the vehicle, the axle moves way up into the wheel well, and it puts it pretty damn close to the bump stops, which are connected to the frame. So you can see, you know, what happens here is you end up with a much bouncier ride. You've got a lot less support there, and you're risking hitting your bump stops pretty regularly. And that is definitely what was happening with me. So as you could tell from the intro. So where air over leaf comes in finally is that you are taking and you're adding an airbag into this whole arrangement to provide both lift and weight support. So you can kind of imagine what we'll have is a bracket that will come off like right here. So the bracket, and then that's going to have an airbag or an air sleeve that's actually attached to it. Get out of your fly. And then you've got a bracket that's going to come off of the frame. Look at my pretty sweet bracket there. Yeah. That's going to bolt on, bop, 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 something like that. And basically you're going to have a airbag. And now, you know, this is obviously going to be a deflated bag, because what you're ending up with is your aiming to have that airbag provide lift to this whole setup. So when you put air into this, it'll expand and it will actually push the axle and the leaf pack down. And that is what is going to give you your lift and your ride height. So very basic explanation, but this kind of gives you a visual on it, what exactly we're going to be doing. We did consider in the front, but in the front area on the shoebox, we've got a pretty dramatic axle, frame shape here. It's not nice, big, and open like this. It actually sweeps down like kind of more like that. So, you know, it's not optimal. Oops. So there we go, guys. You can kind of see this is about what I'm going to be doing with the shoebox. So let's just jump into it. Enough of me gabbing. If you have any questions, I know I had to go over this kind of quickly, but I don't want the video to be 45 minutes long. So let's just get into it, start bolting it on. If you got questions, put them in the comments. Otherwise, hopefully I'll answer them here as it's getting put together. So I think we're going to end up just cutting the exhaust, because we do have that clearance issue there with the exhaust pipe. The other side's actually a little bit worse, but after looking at it, I think we can cut and modify the exhaust to kind of reroute it and give ourselves enough space to still use the back side of the axle for our mounting. So yeah, well, let's do that. Let's cut this exhaust on both sides. Both pipes, this side and passenger side, and then let's mount our bracket in there and just kind of get a look at it. I've got one of the bags mounted up to the top bracket with the fitting in, and that way we can kind of test it all out. But I think we're going to be able to make this work. So let's get this done. We got good clearance with the airline. That looks pretty nice and straight up and down. And as this guy moves up, it should be nice and square. So I think we're ready to do the screws, drill some holes. Okay, guys, got something I gotta talk to you about here. It's amazing how messy everything gets when you're in the middle of a project. Okay, so I have these super old Firestones, and I actually tested fitment originally with these guys way back when. And, okay, so what I had found back then was, like, I was concerned about spacing between the bag itself and then the axle. So then I ordered the kit that's specifically for these cars. And so I got this thing bolted up, and I'm looking at it, and I realized that I would need to run like a 4-inch block to get it really nice and low, which is kind of where it's sitting right now, like full saggage. Maybe a little extra. This thing was sitting actually a little bit higher than that. So the last thing I want is for this car to sit any higher in the back, because that's pointless. I'll put leaf springs back into it and, you know, just drive it then.
if that's the case. And this is just where I mounted this thing. There's probably another way to do it. But what I figured out was that if you use conventional bags, and I'll have to find the specs on these, but I think these are a really typical 2500. Check this out. I bolted it in real quick, and look at that. That's really decent, and there's actually a little bit more room to spare. So what I'm gonna do, you can see how inverted the spring is. What I'm actually gonna do is set down the camera here, and I'm gonna jack it up just that last little bit and see if I can if this thing can actually hit the bump stops, which is only about an inch away from that. So I'm gonna do that right now, and let's see what happens. It's hitting the bump stop. That's just nuts. So there we go. If you use a 2500, I can use the same holes where I had mounted this thing, which is really convenient. Now the one trade-off is that this particular bag I think is a 6-inch diameter when it's expanded, so that's a clearance issue with exhaust. So we're really complicating the exhaust here. But I think there's still a way to do it. And these bags are rated for a hell of a lot more weight, which means that you need a lot less air pressure to drive, and then that should, in theory, make it an even softer ride. But it's certainly more supported this way. So this is kind of cool. So I think we might go this route, and I'll test these out. They're old, and if they prove to be a pain in the butt and they leak or whatever, I can just order up a set, because this is a very kind of standard sized airbag. I mean, this is the most run-of-the-mill type airbag. It'd be a bummer to have to buy another set, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, big deal. So I've got a bunch of air sleeves and airbags and stuff sitting around. Inevitably, I'll have another project that'll justify using them on. But this is cool. So yeah, I think where we go from here is I'm going to release the suspension on this guy and then pull the brackets off, see if we can set this bag up to be bolted in, and then we're going to duplicate this over on the other side. All right, let's get going. Look at that. Sweet. Okay. All right, guys. So, I've got the upper brackets bolted in. There's 3 bolts. I'm gonna actually put a 4th one in here. But so we've got the upper bracket in. The lower brackets are not like bolted down just yet. They use carriage bolts, and this bracket is a little C-channel piece to clamp on the underside, kind of in the way that like the U-joints, rather the U-bolts work with like the leaf springs. It's kind of a similar thing. On the Shoebox Ford, I'm finding that it is very tight. These carriage bolts might be at a tiny bit of an angle pressing against this lower plate. That's what sandwiches everything together with the U-bolts. So it is super tight, but we'll see how that all plays out, and if it causes any extra stress or anything like that, like I'll figure out kind of another way to do it. But everything so far looks pretty good, and I am actually able to use the hook that's on the lower bracket. With this orientation, I'm able to use the hook to go around one of the U-bolts. So that's nice. That's a little extra peace of mind, just to make sure that everything's going to stay put. So, a few things that I've found. So, funny thing, these bags are actually going to work a lot better than the sleeves. At least in terms of fitment. We'll find out how they work with space and stuff like that. The exhaust is going to be the biggest thing. But it looks like even at full compression, there's still space between everything, so they shouldn't be rubbing. One nice thing is that these bags get a lot lower than the sleeves do. So it's funny, I'm going to end up with 2 sets of sleeves as backups, but whatever. I tested these guys out at, I think, 25 pounds or something like that, and didn't see any leaks in anything, so that's good news. So far, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm actually able to get all the way to the bump stops with this style of bag, this 2,500 pound bag. So that's cool. Unlike the sleeves where it would have been not great, honestly. Like basically ride height currently, like where it's been driving around at. So that's something to think about if you do pick up the bag kit, the Aero Relief kit from Ridetech. At least from what I've found, that's what you're going to run into, is that you're not going to get as low. Unless you want to try and use like a 4-inch block, then I think you'll be able to at least hit the bump stop, maybe the frame, if you take the bump stops out. But to me, it just, like, I want to try and work with what I have. If anything, I want to be able to add more leaves. I want to be able to like strengthen things up as much as absolutely possible, still to have it sit nice and low, which right now I'm pretty happy with how low it does sit at this current situation. So if I want to, if I get the wild hair up my ass, I can put a 3-inch block on the front of, or on this axle and get a little bit lower. But I don't know, I think it's fine. Why mess around too much more when links are going to be going into it eventually anyways? So alright guys, so that's all that we've got figured out so far. Brackets are working out really good from Ridetech. A 2,500 pound bag fits super well. I trimmed up the brackets that it'll fit the adapter to go from 1/2 inch NPT to 1/8 inch. The upper bracket is what had to get a little bit trimmed, so splash some paint on that. So let's move on, let's get this all bolted in. And I guess we could probably, one other detail. The bags don't allow full droop, and I think you'd probably run into this in pretty much any scenario, or even if you got links or whatever, is that you are not going to be able to get your back wheels and tires off as easily because these cars have such a low fender well. So that's something to think about, but what's nice about these is you can either just use the 1/3/16 nut on the bottom of this to release that, or you can unbolt it at the top, or you can like maybe undo the C-channel with the carriage bolts and have the whole bracket move. There's a few different ways to try and do it, and we'll play with that a little bit later, but let's put it together. one trade-off with this thing is that I now have less droop with the suspension. So what I'm gonna have to do is loosen up this lower bolt here so that the suspension can droop all the way, and then I can toss the tire on. So that's kind of a bummer. Like as is, you can't really get too much more out of it. Well, I should say you can get a lot more stretch out of this, but it's just not quite enough. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright, it's basically a ride height. Let's drop this thing down. Lord. It doesn't take anything to support that back end. That's hilarious. That last little bit takes forever. Well, that's good to know. It lifts it effortlessly. Like 10 PSI and it gets them all the way up. Jesus. It's gonna ride like a Cadillac this way.
yeah, guys, this thing rides so damn good. So let's recap it. We've got 2 leaf springs that are removed from each side. So that allows a significant drop, probably 3 inches, somewhere about there. We've got a 2-inch drop block, and now that would slam it all the way down to the bump stops, basically the bump stops. And now we've got the helper bag, so the air over leaf in there, and that is kind of doing wonders to picking up the rest of the weight of the car. So the thing just like rides like a dream. It's only got like 10 psi of air pressure in the airbags, so it just floats. But the funny thing is it doesn't feel sloppy. Now, what could be the reason for that is that I've got literally the best possible air suspension setup in the front end of this thing with shock waves. So I've got, so if you're not familiar, shock waves are a Ridetech component, and what that does is it's a airbag that's wrapped around a Fox shock. So you've got like 18 or 24-way adjustable shocks with an airbag wrapped around it. So it's pretty serious suspension setup. It's like a pro touring kind of air suspension setup. And then in the back, I've got a set of cheapo Firestone 2500s. So it's kind of ironic, and then on air over leaf of all things. So it works. It's funny because the front's fantastic, the back is garbage. The front might be so good that it's helping the back, but I don't know. I kind of don't notice it. It just works really good. So that kind of recaps it. So it's not ideal. It's not the perfect setup. In the back, ideally you'd have a 4-link, either parallel or triangulated, or you'd have a 2-link setup. And that's kind of optimal. Those are like, your best suspension setup for it. But in this case, this is a dirt cheap way to put air suspension in the back end of these things and, still be able to get it pretty damn low. It's very cheap, we'll put it that way. It's a fraction of the cost. So there we go, guys. By all means, just take this with a grain of salt. It's not the ideal setup. There's trade-offs. And honestly, like, I would suggest against it if you're literally trying to invert your leaf springs to get it low. Like, this one's basically horizontal. Beyond that, you start running the risk of things actually cracking because you're overdoing it. So there we go, guys. Thank you for tuning in for another video. I hope that this was helpful. We'll see you on the next. I think what we'll probably be doing is a trailer hitch setup. So that'll probably be the next video that we have out. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you on the next one.